Hey everyone, how are you doing today? We are gonna answer a question from a friend of ours. How you doing, brother?
Pretty good. You?
Not too bad, not too bad. Just playing my Vita this afternoon. Been playing PlayStation All Stars again. And so yeah, I figured this show will actually be dedicated to our favorite franchise of all time, Final Fantasy. And the reason why we are going to be doing this particular subject is because we had a question that was asked, and so we're going to address that and kind of talk about our views on everything. So, without further ado, the question we had was from our friend Bryant Roos. And his question was, I would like to hear your thoughts on the Final Fantasy series as it exists today and the direction it's heading or has gone. As a once diehard fan of the series, I have a hard time connecting to the current lineup. I don't think I'm the only one either. Now, I can definitely see where Bryant is coming from on this. With, gosh, 27 years of a franchise, you're going to have a lot of different storylines, a lot of different characters, a lot of different, ups and downs. And so, I look forward to tackling this one. What's your opinion on it?
Well, it's a pretty big question. It's one of those questions that, for this particular game, because of the way that it's changed over the years, really comes down to a lot of different things in terms of how a person prefers their games now versus back then. I don't know if you want me to give personal opinions right now, or if you want to give yours first.
Well, let's just give a quick backdrop on Final Fantasy. I'm sure we all know or heard of this. Final Fantasy, of course, is owned by originally Squaresoft, which then became Square Enix, and it originally was founded as a franchise by Harunobu Sakaguchi in 1987, with Final Fantasy being the first title. And ironically enough, that was a last-ditch effort for them to revive this company, and shockingly, they put it out and it did so well, and well, here we are now, 27 years later, and over, gosh, I think it's 100 million sales for all the games. So, and of course, as I said, there have been a lot of installments, a lot of, we're up to now Final Fantasy 14, and oh gosh, a plethora of side stuff with legends and whatnot. So I feel like with this series, personally speaking, I'm more of the older Final Fantasy games, with having played every single one of them at least once, and a few of them way more, specifically Final Fantasies 4, 6, 7, 8, and 10. And actually 13. I have played that more than once. I definitely connected mostly with the Super Nintendo years for the franchise, and there's no doubt that Final Fantasy VI is probably it is my all-time favorite video game.
I think a lot of people right off the bat will agree with you, and I think that's the reason why Brian is asking the question, is because of the fact that so many people really loved the Final Fantasy series kind of at its mid-career You don't meet too many people that say that, hey, I prefer Final Fantasy 1 through 3 the most. If you do, that's cool. Those games are pretty awesome. I wouldn't be as big of a fan if I didn't like those games either. But generally, a lot of love for the series goes to 4, 6, 7. 8 kind of gets a little bit of a teeter-totter.
Oh, yeah.
But 9 and 10 definitely get a lot of love, especially 9. A lot of people will argue all day on forums and threads about 9 being the best, and then you got the Final Fantasy 7 fans, and it's like the cool thing to hate on Final Fantasy 7. And it gets a little ridiculous being a big Final Fantasy fan, because unfortunately, as you've seen over the years, there's just so many different games, there's so many different characters and personalities, so a lot of people have their opinions, which I've grown to be respectful of. Back in the day, if this was like maybe 2004 and you came up to me and said, hey, Final Fantasy 7 is stupid, I'd be pissed off and wanting to punch you in the face.
Right. Yeah, and with having the different characters and different storylines, you're going to naturally connect, and you're going to have nostalgia. For us playing Final Fantasy VI, I think the reason why is because that was a game that we felt very comfortable with. We loved the characters and the storyline. Oh, good Lord, we don't even need to talk about that. And then, I think the further it went, like I wasn't actually a big fan of Final Fantasy IX, just solely based on it was so different, I felt, than 7 and 8.
Right then, everybody hit stop and play.
Well, I'm not saying that it's a bad game. I'm just saying it's probably one of my least favorite of the PlayStation era, and only because I just didn't connect with the characters like I did for like 7 or 8, and I felt that 10 really knocked it out of the park, and that's of course something that we could easily debate, but but then we got to, the further it went, the less I think I personally was really into it. Like 11 was online, which I really didn't care for that. And then 12, I might get some gunshots here. I thought 12 was god-awful. It was basically you had the MMORPG aspect, but playing one player, which some people would love. And with all due respect, but yeah, I just didn't like it. The names of cities were ridiculous, and Vaughn, I think was his name, was, I don't know, I just didn't like him. He didn't seem cool to me at all. 13 was also that way. It started, like, I didn't like that you didn't have the, the world maps, and,
well, see, here's where, like, I have to butt in. 13 definitely is where a lot of people started to develop a lot of anger and hate for the series. The reason for it is because they felt as though it was taking a huge turn from the original setting and storylines of the original games, which I do agree. But the thing is with 13 is that it kind of catered to what the internet and what a lot of people were speaking about back in those days. If you remember, like, prior to Final Fantasy X, it was a lot of you'd have to wait for a little bar to go up, and once it filled up, then you can take your turn, wait for somebody else's bar to fill up, and it was just kind of like a waiting game at that point. Final Fantasy X kind of executed it a little bit nicely, where it was like turn after turn after turn after turn. But the problem that was happening was that people were wanting to have more action based. They wanted it to be like a fluent game, and so 13 was released in terms of you still could make your choices, but the other characters were AI controlled. But if you played through the game, you would know that there was some cases where it was like you would have to set your characters to heal, and rather than heal, they're casting shell or protect, and you're just like throwing your controller asking what the hell are they doing,
Right.
because you have no control over them. I think that drove a lot of people crazy. And another thing that was happening was the open worlds and the towns that people had loved before. There was also a large group of people that really hated to go into town and not know who to talk to and what to do. So rather than giving so many spots of confusion, it was, let's make this game linear. Let's make it so you have
From point A to point B.
Exactly, and you don't have to talk to all these townspeople. You don't have to look for the weapon shop, and I think that's where a lot of people were saddened when they started playing through 13. And it was like, where do I go to get new weapons? And it's like, oh, I had to go to a save point, which it wasn't fun. It ruined a lot of the fun experience of going to a new shop. And sometimes like the NPCs at those shops would say something quirky or stupid that would make you smirk. But in this case, it was just, you go in, you choose out of a very confusing menu, and then it was like, okay, now what? And I felt like because of those particular things with that game, it just distanced a lot of people. They just didn't feel like they were going on this long journey like in Final Fantasy VI to stop the end of the world, stop the evil people. You know, you had your cast of characters that most people didn't really care for, and if you ask anybody who was the evil group in 13, not even myself, I don't even remember. And it was
You didn't even really find out until the absolute end of the game. But then they also did that in Final Fantasy VIII that you remember. It wasn't until the end of the game that all of a sudden, Ultimecia is who you're going after, and it's like, wait, what?
But what 8 did well with that is that it gave you a face to sit there and be mad at. You had Cypher, which you were just like, oh, that asshole. Why does he keep always wanting to fight me at the worst possible moment? I haven't even equipped any of my stuff yet.
Go stuff a hot dog in your mouth.
Yeah. All of a sudden it's like, you're trying to sit there and get to town to heal and everything else, and all of a sudden it's like Cypher's jumping out of a bush like in Pokemon, like, hey, let's have a challenge. You're like, no, go away. But I think 8, it may not have a very memorable enemy group or name to them or anything else, but I think 8 is a lot more memorable than say 13. If I had to try to remember the events of 13 and the enemies in there, I couldn't tell you, other than the end boss is an old guy that turns into a 2-dimensional clock thing with a hand, and it's not very great. You have 7, 8, 9, and 10 that had all these memorable super bosses and end bosses. You can't forget Kefka, you can't forget Sephiroth, and then all of a sudden it's just like we have this cutting edge graphic engine of a game, and I'm fighting an old guy that turns into a fucking clock. What the hell? Of all things Squaresoft or Square Enix could have put together, it was a 2-dimensional clock.
Well, and even 10, you get to the end of the game and you're like, oh, you're gonna be fighting Sin, and then it's, oh, well, now you're fighting Jecht as Sin, and you're like, man, this shit's badass. And you got the that his song playing in the background, heavy metal, and it's like, yeah, that it's rememberable, and that's just it. 13 really didn't have any memorable scenes for me. You don't have anything that just that pulls on your heartstrings or anything like that. And I mean, I know some people disagree with the love with, Lightning and her sister and stuff like that. But it's just not the same. Not the same at all. It's not like a Locke and Rachel.
Yeah,
So.
the cast of the previous games really helped make those games as great as they are, and plus I really believe in like a support cast to really emphasize a good game. And with 13 you had your cast of characters, but it was like you didn't really care what happened either way. It was like, okay, just gonna go through this game and kind of let stuff go as it is.
Shoot, the whole time I was hoping that Hope was gonna die. That was a disappointment.
There was some things that was kind of neat. I like that Snow and Sarah had their relationship, but it was kind of confusing as to what was really going on behind like the story, like what was going on with this evil organization that where you're being used but you're not being used, and it's like, they want you to destroy the end boss, but you don't kill the end boss, but you end up having to kill the end boss. It's like, what the hell?
Well, yeah, and that was three quarters through the game. Like, everything is kind of making sense, but then you get up to the end there, and they start throwing all these wrenches at you. It was almost as if they kind of rushed the ending. That like, oh well, crap, we gotta make this game end, and so it was like they skipped some story in there. So all of a sudden you're going, exactly like that. Like, you get to the end boss and you're like, haha, well, yes, you gotta kill him, but really you don't. Like, what do you want me to do, you jerks?
Yeah, that's why it made no sense to me, and that's why I was fairly upset over how they executed the ending. I think the one thing that I did like with 13 was the fact that I did like the cast in some way. I like their designs, and with Vanille and Fang, I did see a relationship between the two that's similar to two of my close friends. So I kind of think of my two friends when I see those two characters. But I hate and like the battle system with 13. I prefer to be able to pick what I'm gonna do as well as my teammates, because I don't want them to, use shell or protect when I need them to be doing different abilities that they might have. But the fights, if you had them all planned out right, if you were actually leveled up enough, you could sit there and go through a fight within a matter of 3 to 5 seconds. All you have to do is walk into an enemy, and your teammates would run and kill stuff, and you're done.
Unless it's Lungui.
Yeah, well, the problem to the fight system would be that you would have to make sure that your characters were geared and leveled up enough. So that required a lot of excessive grinding and being able to figure out how to trigger more enemies, because there was no random spawns. It was enemies are on the map, which I know that's something that you had mentioned liking back in the day for like Chrono Trigger, but right. I personally don't mind either or for visible enemies or not. I feel as though that if the enemies are invisible, it makes it a lot easier to sit there and run in circles and grind that way, as opposed to, okay, where's another enemy respawning at? Oh, it's over here. Run.
Oh, that makes sense. And for us, we did a lot of that grinding in games growing, any RPG. Like, you find yourself spending, at least half of your game time is just grinding, getting into a new area and going, oh crap, I don't have enough money to buy the best gear, and I'm kind of getting my butt handed to me. Well, that means I should probably grind a little bit. So you do that for a few hours, and then you're like, okay, well, now I have better gear, and well, I better grind a little bit longer just in case. And
So here's kind of where I want to touch on Bry's question. He had mentioned about the latest Final Fantasy game and kind of the comparison between that and the old ones. And I can kind of understand that there is a giant letdown, so to speak, with Final Fantasy 15 and the lack of interest with it. And I would probably say that there's a couple different contributing factors to it. Right off the bat, off the top of my head, the last couple of Final Fantasy games have not been that great, and I personally don't know the last Final Fantasy game that Bry really liked. But if you think about it, if the last one he liked was Final Fantasy X, that's going back to
12 years ago.
Yeah, early 2000s. So it's quite a bit of long time to sit there and not like a series. And then it's like a new game gets announced, and it's like you're kind of want to be excited, but then it's like, wait a minute, how do I know it's not going to be like 13?
Well, and there you go. You just touched it. And another reason why I would say, I mean, even personally, why I'm not super excited for the new Final Fantasy. This game has been in development for so long that it's like, okay, well, this is starting to be developed back in, when 13 was, they were doing that, it was supposed to be, as we all know, Final Fantasy 13 Versus. So my concern is, oh God, with 13 being kind of shady, is this going to follow in the footsteps? And of course I want it to be amazing. But, with it having so much time in development, it does concern me. And I know that our friend Kiki has addressed, because they have said that the game will take 40 hours to complete, which we all know is kind of a vague, time, because 40 hours for whom? Some people play through games very fast, and so yeah, it could take them 35 to 40 hours, where some other people might actually want to do all the side stuff, grinding, and so that 40 hours turns into 70 very quick. And not only that,
I think my first playthrough of Final Fantasy VII actually was at 45 hours.
That was about the same for me.
And then, of course, like right afterwards, you try to sit there and get everybody up to level 99, just because you can, and there's no other games that we had at the time because we were poor.
Right. Now, I think that for Square Enix to say that 15 should take 40 hours is actually a really cool thing. Now, the reason I say that is because, yeah, a lot of these games you play through nowadays, you can beat most of the story modes in a matter of 6 hours, 7 hours, maybe a little bit longer, give or take. So for Square to have a game that they're saying will take 40 hours, that's a pretty hefty amount of time. And that's with one playthrough, not like, other games that, for example, Ni no Kuni, to do all the extra stuff. That's what makes that game take so long. But do you need to do it? They're saying this is a straight playthrough, 40 hours. So that aspect does excite me. And I do hope that because of 10 years of development time, that we are going to get a story that's going to floor us. That we're going to get a soundtrack that's amazing. Even though we don't have Nobuo Uematsu on the reins for the soundtrack, I have high hopes.
Well, unfortunately, gotta play the devil's advocate here a little bit. There's a lot of skepticism that I have with it, based off the little bit of news that I read for it. I mean, with a lot of the games out there, I like to read some of the news, but I try not to read too much because I just don't want it spoiled for me.
Right.
But with 15, the news that I've came across with the game is that the game is about a group of guys, and I literally mean a group of guys. There is no females that are playable in the game. They are basically in a car and they're driving throughout the game, and it's basically like a road trip. And that's a lack for better words, but that's essentially what it is that they're just driving around. And I know that there's obviously a lot more to it than just that, but just the premise of it, that this is your team of people and there is no females in it, it kind of does bother me a little bit, because of the fact that we've had so many other Final Fantasy games up to this point that had very strong, very memorable Final Fantasy characters, and it's just like, wait, so now we don't get to play as one of these girls? That kind of bums me out in a way, because I really liked sitting there and being able to have these fights with Lightning or Tifa or Selphie for that matter. The list goes on, and to know that your characters are just going around in this car and doing these fights and everything else, it does make me a little skeptical. But I'm still gonna buy the game once it's released. I do know that for sure because of the fact that it's Final Fantasy and I gotta try it out. But I'm just not really holding my breath a whole lot.
Well, no. I mean, I think that because of the fact that we still know so little, and I agree that I don't like to actively search anything out because I don't want any spoilers, and unfortunately, to go and research, of course, you have to go online. People are douchebags and will do anything in their power to spoil anything for anybody, and I don't want that to happen. Like, kind of going off series here, next year I'm going to stay away from anything that says Metal Gear on it because I just don't want anything ruined. And because the Metal Gear series have such strong storylines, there's going to be that one jerk who finds out something and it's going to go off and just go into something that, say, IGN posts and be like, this person dies. I don't want that crap. No, I like to experience a Metal Gear storyline fresh, not knowing what's going to happen. Yeah, very. I get to be kind of a jerk about it. So
here's something I generally tell a lot of old school Final Fantasy fans is that essentially at this point, the series that you knew and grew up with is kind of dead. I mean, I really hate to use that word, but essentially
we don't have the open worlds and ATBs, and you know, yes, the only thing that kind of connects them all now is they have Moogles, they have Chocobos, and summons. You know,
they don't even have Moogles though, because in 13 they were only there for the shop stuff.
Right. Well, and that's what I mean. They're not even a playable character. They're not floating around. And it does suck. So, as far as your question, Bryant, I am 100% with you, man. I do feel completely disconnected. And
but you guys are not like completely stranded. There's a lot of people that do feel the same, and this is kind of where it's important to sit there and try to look for other games that, like, essentially what you are missing from Final Fantasy is what you should be looking for in other games. If you're wanting to have that old school swords and shield type of stuff, there are so many other JRPGs with that type of style, but you're gonna have to look, because a lot of them are PS1 through PS2. There isn't too many for PS3 still.
Well, like I had actually mentioned, Ni no Kuni is one right off the top of my head that it's not 100% exactly like those older games, but it does take you back.
It does, but that's why I'm saying that you have to kind of ask yourself, what are you missing from those old school Final Fantasy games? Because as much as I did love Ni no Kuni, I have 100% completion for it, but you have to ask yourself, what is it that I'm missing? If it's the story, then yeah, Ni no Kuni does have a pretty good story, and even though it looks kind of childish, it does have its fairly dark moments. But like combat-wise, it does play a lot more like Pokemon than say Final Fantasy does.
Right.
And so that's why you kind of have to sit there and you have to be a little bit flexible, but there are so many other JRPGs out there to try. I personally love Persona, and it does have sort of like the timed battles. You sit there and you pick stuff. You can hit X to attack, hit X to attack, hit X to choose item, and its storyline can have its dark moments. And of course, like the setting and everything else is kind of a little bit more cheerful than, say, the destructive world of Final Fantasy VI. But I mean, it is a fairly fun game. Obviously it has to be fun because I have over 300 hours put into the Persona 3 and Persona 3 portable games. But there's thankfully a lot of lists online that you can look up RPGs for different systems. The only thing that would hold you back is either you don't have the console to play it on, or your computer's not that good to run ROMs and emulators. But otherwise, there's definitely a ton of games to check out.
Well, and another thing is, you could always look at, from Final Fantasy, if you're missing a story, I mean, there are other games with amazing stories that you can play. Yeah, they're not going to be, RPGs like, Final Fantasy are, like the turn-based, but, you can jump to a Metal Gear game, and you're going to have a story that will be just as good as a Final Fantasy game.
The only problem to Metal Gear, though, versus Final Fantasy is obviously there's the whole tension thing. You're a lot more intense during a Metal Gear game, careful to make any move, whereas you can kick back with a cold beer, Mountain Dew in my case, and you can sit there and grind fighting rabid rabbits or something for an hour and then sleep, But
just having those old RPGs that we grew up and we played them and abused them, and outside of Final Fantasy, we also played Earthbound, and we know that game was a lot of fun as well.
There's a lot of options if you're considering at least Super Nintendo. Super Nintendo had a lot of JRPG games, and then unfortunately recommending games from the PS1 era is really hard because the graphics of them make them a little bit tricky to play.
Right.
So I don't immediately write off that option, but at the same time I sort of do, because it just depends on how well you can view things. Like, I tried playing Siphon Filter. I know it's not a JRPG, but it was like I tried playing that, and the controls for it and the response time that I'm so used to on modern day systems was so off that I just couldn't play it very long. I think I played it for maybe 20 minutes, and then I refused to ever let that be downloaded on my system again. But there's, for PS1 era, you set aside of Final Fantasy games, there's still like Legend of Dragoon, Xenogears, even though I don't like it, there's Legend of Legaia, there's
Legend of Mana,
Suikoden. There's a long list of games.
But you do have to come to grips with the fact that graphically it's not going to be anywhere close. And so where a lot of people say, well, graphics, I don't mind, you're going to have a hard time playing them just based on that. I mean, like you were saying that you played Siphon Filter. I mean, I've tried playing games like Crash Bandicoot and stuff like that, thinking, oh, nostalgia, and then I go back and I play them and I'm like, oh my god, this is terrible. And, you know, back then for us it was like, holy cow, these are so lifelike.
Yeah.
So it does create another challenge when you're playing those games. But if you truly don't mind, oh yeah, the PlayStation had tons of good games, you know, RPGs on it that you can wrap yourself for hundreds of hours easily. And I would feel that most computers nowadays, if you can't, you know, find the system or the games, because some games are not easy to find and they tend to be pretty expensive. Like I've seen where, you know, my girlfriend got me the Lunar 2, and when she purchased it, it was, you know, well over $100 for the game. And I'm sure anyone who's listening, you know, you're in a different region of the United States or, well, anywhere, it might be easier for you to find these games for cheaper, but it's still gonna yeah, it's still gonna be hard. So, and where I wouldn't condone downloading emulators or ROMs, you know, unless you have the original copy, of course, naturally. Most computers nowadays, if you have a computer that's, I would say within a year or two, should be able to handle those games.
Well, a lot of computers are thankfully able to handle emulators for at least up to, you know, around Super Nintendo. And then from there on, with PS1, there on up, it really does depend on your system. But even like that junky laptop that I have, it can run Super Nintendo games, despite that it lags on everything else.
Right. Well, shoot, so, my computer that I had before I got this Asus that I have now, that I put in like new graphic card and all this other stuff to it. But my old computer, which was all sorts of bad, I was able to play Super Nintendo games on there, and I was even able to play up to Nintendo 64 games. And I tell you what, brother, that thing was a piece of junk.
Yeah.
So
it's like we live in an age nowadays where even you could use your cell phone.
Oh yeah. Oh, but easily. But
my thing that like I said, I really do think that I can understand the questionable taste for the new Final Fantasy game. There's nothing wrong with that, because a lot of people do feel this exact same way. But there are options. There are always options, and there's a lot of people that do sit there and they agree to you with those types of games. Thankfully, there's also like, oh god, I'm trying to think of how I want to word this. Yeah, you just have to do this. You look up a bunch of games that you think might be of interest, watch the videos to see how the gameplay is. Do not read reviews. Reviews are gonna kill whatever interest you have for any game, because let's face it, there's a lot of people that are gonna post up nothing but really bad reviews for a lot of games.
Or they're gonna hype the game up so much that it comes out and it's just not what you would expect or what anyone else expected. I mean, we've seen that with games for the PS4 easily. Watch Dogs comes to mind immediately.
With any game, the way that I do it is I look up a game, I look up different art for it, I check out screenshots, videos, I do not go to reviews. I do not sit there and try to read too much information on a game.
I would stay off of YouTube as well.
Well, YouTube is fine if you're watching like the game trailers or gameplay footage, because the fact that you're going to want to get a visual representation of, say...
Okay, I see what you mean. Trailers are one thing, but like, I would not, by any means, I would stay away from like Let's Play videos, because the reason I say that is, unless you are diligent and you don't look at comments, there's going to be those douchebags that post in the comments, oh yeah, this person like kills this person. Hey, you don't want that. You don't want to. And then, even if, like, during the video itself, they might accidentally reveal something. I mean, that's up to you, of course, but just my personal things. I don't do the Let's Play crap.
Well, yeah, you want to stay away from the comment sections, and you want to stay away from reviews as best as possible. The one thing to do is that if you are curious for JRPGs, just make a post. So we have our gaming group, or you ask a friend and be like, hey, has anybody played this game? And likely a lot of people will have played a lot of the more bigger names out there for JRPGs, but there are smaller ones that will kind of be like, oh, I've never heard of that one. And of course, curiosity will spread, and there might be one or a couple other people that will look up the game to see what it's like. But you do have an awesome source of looking up different games, and that's what I do. I have my games that I really like. And then there's games that I had never really heard about, like Nier. I hadn't heard of that one. And then I had looked up some information, saw that it looked kind of cool that you're running around and you're killing things, and it's supposed to have this great soundtrack and one of the best stories ever. So it's like, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and check it out. And sure enough, it really did have one of the best soundtracks I've heard in recent years, and definitely one hell of a story.
Oh yeah, that's a storyline that you don't forget.
So yeah, definitely check out other games and try to find what you're missing from Final Fantasy. There are other options to play.
And never forget that there's always the resources of people around you. You know, it would be easy just to go on and say, you know, to our page and just say, hey guys, I am into these kind of games, can you give me a suggestion on something that would be similar, or something that you guys would recommend? And that's something I wouldn't even mind doing, like giving recommendations to people for games, you know, based on the ones that I've played and I've loved. I mean, there's games that I've loved so much that I've played multiple times, you know, and it never gets old. And I know you're the same way. Like, we have all these years of gaming behind us that, you know, you could ask us any style of game, and I'm sure we could come up with a list of at least 5 games like, oh, yeah, dog, you got to check this out now.
Yeah, there's always another JRPG that I have yet to play that guarantee I will check out at some point. But if you're curious for other games, I would definitely recommend like titles from Atlus. They definitely have a really good grasp on making good JRPGs. They do the Persona games and they do the Shin Megami games. But I personally have every Shin Megami game that they've released for PS2 in the US, at least, and I stand behind all of them. They're all really good, solid games.
Yeah. Well, and there's, like we said, there's other titles, there's other games, there's, you know, all these systems, a ton of history of RPGs. Can't be too hard to find one that you would love. So Hopefully, Bryant, we answered your question and you have a clear idea of what we start thinking as far as these games, the future of Final Fantasy. You know, all we can do is hope that this next one kind of does take us back a little bit despite what we're seeing so far, and that we have a game that gives us memories again. So keep the questions coming, guys, and, you know, hopefully we can address those as well, and, you know, hopefully you guys like it. So, all right, man. Well, let's go ahead and we'll close this up, and yeah, we'll see you guys later.